The glare from the large television screen cast long shadows across our living room. My father, Vance, stood there with a smug smile on his face. He gripped his heavy leather Bible in one hand and the TV remote in the other. He looked completely sure of his victory. Next to him on the sofa sat my mother, Cordelia. She held a handkerchief to her face, crying softly and pretending to be deeply heartbroken over her bad son. My parents thought they were playing the tape that would expose me as a criminal and justify throwing me out on the street. They had no idea they were clicking play on the absolute destruction of their own marriage. If this story touches you, please don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I stood perfectly still near the door, my arms crossed, watching the screen as the video player loaded a file named driveway_cam_04.mp4. For the past several months, I had been treated like an outcast in this house. I was the disappointment who could never meet the impossible standards of my deeply religious, wealthy family. Now, they thought they finally had the proof to destroy me. But I didn't shake or beg for forgiveness. I just stared at the screen because I knew the truth. I knew that the footage on that tape was going to burn their hypocritical world straight to the ground. To understand how a 20-year-old college student ends up being interrogated by his own parents like a criminal, you have to understand my family. My father was a major real estate developer and a leader in our local church. He ran our home like a strict military camp. We had mandatory family prayers at dawn, tracking apps on our phones, and zero privacy. My mother was his perfect partner, always acting sweet and reminding me to obey my father. But behind the beautiful furniture and perfect smiles, things were falling apart. Lately, my father had been furious about money, screaming about the household budget. At the same time, I kept catching my mother awake at 3 a.m., staring anxiously at her tablet with tear-stained eyes. When I asked if she was okay, she would quickly hide the screen and say she was just praying. I wanted to believe her, but a dark secret was growing in our house. Soon, a sudden discovery would change everything, forcing my parents to turn on me, and leading us directly to this moment in front of the TV screen. 6 months before that tense moment in front of the television, our home felt more like a beautifully decorated prison than a place to live. To the outside world, my father, Vance, was a highly respected real estate developer and a shining pillar of our local church community. He built a reputation on absolute perfection, and he expected his family to mirror that image every single day. Inside our house, he ran things like a military dictatorship disguised as a holy sanctuary. Every morning began at exactly 6 o'clock with mandatory family devotionals, where Vance would lecture us on purity, obedience, and the dangers of the secular world. If I sat up too late studying, missed a morning prayer, or questioned his rules, it was treated as a major sin. He installed tracking software on my phone, monitored my internet usage, and kept a strict log of my college schedule. Love in our household was never unconditional. It was a reward given only when I surrendered my freedom and fell perfectly in line with his demands. My mother, Cordelia, played her part flawlessly as the fragile, submissive matriarch. Whenever Vance finished yelling at me for a minor mistake, she would pull me aside, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, and remind me how lucky I was to have such a holy, God-fearing father to guide me. But as the weeks went on, the walls of our perfect fortress began to crack, and I started noticing things that did not add up. Despite his massive income from his commercial real estate projects, my father began having sudden, unprovoked outbursts about our household finances. He would sit at the dining table, aggressively highlighting bank statements, and slam his fists down while screaming that we needed to cut back on groceries and utility usage immediately. It made no sense for a wealthy man to panic over minor bills, but whenever I asked about it, he would snap at me to mind my own business. At the same time, my mother's behavior grew increasingly erratic. I began finding her awake in the dead of night, pacing the kitchen floor with a pale face and bloodshot eyes. One night, I walked in on her having a full panic attack over her tablet, her hands trembling violently as she frantically refreshed a web page. The moment she heard my footsteps, she quickly locked the device and smoothed down her dress, forcing a weak smile. When I asked her why she was crying in the dark, she brushed it off, claiming that the weight of the world's sins was heavy on her heart and she was simply interceding for lost souls. I wanted to believe her pious explanation, but the sheer terror in her eyes told a completely different story. The oppressive rules in the house grew even tighter as my parents' hidden anxieties mounted, turning our home into a pressure cooker of unsaid secrets, and setting the stage for the explosive discovery that would soon change everything. The fragile peace of our house officially shattered on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had spent the entire day away from home, working hard at a place my parents knew nothing about. They completely believed I was sitting in a quiet corner of the university library, studying for my advanced economics classes. Because they thought I was safely occupied for hours, my father decided it was the perfect time to violate my privacy. He conducted one of his unannounced purity sweeps in my bedroom, a toxic habit he used to ensure I wasn't keeping any secular or forbidden items under his roof. He tore through my closet, emptied my drawers, and flipped my bedding. Deep beneath my heavy mattress, stuffed inside the toe of an old, worn-out leather tracking boot, his hands found exactly what he was looking for. He pulled out thick, heavy bundles of $100 bills, tightly bound together with thick rubber bands. It was exactly $42,000 in cold, hard cash. When I finally unlocked the front door and stepped into the grand foyer, I didn't even have time to take off my backpack before the ambush hit me. My father was standing at the top of the stairs, his face bloated and red with an aggressive, self-righteous fury. Before I could even say hello, he charged down the steps, raised his arm, and hurled the heavy rubber-banded stacks of $100 bills directly at my chest. The bundles hit me hard, snapping apart upon impact and scattering across the polished hardwood floor, sliding against my shoes. He didn't ask for an explanation. He immediately began roaring at the top of his lungs, accusing me of drug distribution, working with dangerous cartels, and bringing demonic corruption into his holy household. He screamed that I was a criminal who was going to ruin his reputation in the church and the community. I stood there in absolute shock, looking down at my hard-earned savings spread across the floor. I desperately tried to calm him down, raising my hands and begging him to just listen to me for 1 minute. I told him that the money was entirely clean, legally earned, and that I had a perfectly logical explanation for how I got it. But my voice was completely drowned out by my mother. Cordelia suddenly dropped to her knees right there on the floor, burying her face in her hands and weeping hysterically. She started screaming that her only son had sold his soul to the devil for blood money, loudly mourning the loss of my character. Every time I opened my mouth to defend myself or explain my job, she would scream louder, completely refusing to let me speak a single word. She acted entirely heartbroken, using her dramatic tears to fuel my father's growing rage and ensure that he wouldn't listen to a single shred of logic. In a matter of seconds, my own parents had completely turned on me, branding me a monster in my own home without giving me even a fraction of a second to tell them the truth. My father did not waste any time punishing me. Before the cash even cleared the floor, he snatched my car keys right out of my hand and explicitly told me that my college fund was completely frozen. He then gave me a terrifying ultimatum. I had until sunrise to confess exactly where the rest of my drugs were hidden and hand over a list of my buyers' names. If I refused to talk by morning, he promised he would personally call the police, hand over the $42,000, and watch them drag me away in handcuffs. Looking into his cold, angry eyes, my initial panic suddenly vanished, replaced by a quiet realization. My parents did not want the truth. They actually preferred to believe I was a monster because it fed their self-righteous ego. Trying to reason with their blind anger was completely useless, and I realized that hard, undeniable documentation was the only thing that could save my life. I decided to stop arguing and changed my strategy completely. I looked down at the floor, pretending to be broken and defeated, letting them believe their pressure had finally cracked me. I looked up at my father and told him that I wouldn't say a word, but that the absolute proof of my nightly activities was already recorded on our own property. I reminded him about the expensive, high-definition perimeter security system he had installed around our estate to keep the outside world away. I told him that if he wanted to see exactly who I was meeting and what I was doing every single night, all he had to do was look at the driveway camera logs from the past few weeks. My father's eyes lit up with an ugly, triumphant look. He was eager to get his hands on concrete video evidence of my apparent crimes, imagining how he could present it to his church board as proof of his strict, godly parenting. He demanded that we march into the living room right that second to play the external driveway files on the main television screen. He thought he was walking toward my confession, but he was actually walking right into the digital trap I had carefully laid out for him. To understand the reality of my secret life, you have to look back over the past year. My parents truly believed I was climbing the ladder of traditional academic success, but I had quietly dropped out of my prestigious university courses months ago. I realized that a business degree would be completely useless when our family was secretly standing on the edge of a massive, unseen financial cliff, while my father slept soundly in his massive suburban home. Believing I was a lazy college student, I was living an entirely different life under the cover of darkness. Every single night at midnight, I would slip out of the house and walk through the quiet, neon-lit streets of the city's financial district. My destination was a highly secure, windowless basement facility that required multiple security clearances just to step inside the door. I am a completely self-taught data analyst. I had spent years learning how to navigate the complex, hidden layers of the internet, understanding how data is protected, how it is stolen, and how to stop advanced cybercriminals. A foreign risk management firm had noticed my skills on an online coding forum and offered me a job that paid incredibly well but demanded everything from me. It was a grueling, highly stressful night shift where I worked directly on the edge of the law to defend international companies from catastrophic server breaches. I would sit in front of multiple glowing monitors for 14 hours straight, my eyes burning from the strain, frantically blocking hostile network attacks and rebuilding crushed digital security walls. The $42,000 my father found hidden under my mattress was not a stash of dirty drug money. It was my accumulated hazard pay, earned dollar by dollar through pure, exhausting labor while my parents rested comfortably in their beds, completely oblivious to the digital warfare their son was fighting to keep them afloat. My grueling nightly sacrifice took a sudden, dark turn exactly 3 months ago. I was working in that secure basement facility, building a highly advanced, localized data encryption wall for one of our corporate clients. To make absolutely sure my coding was seamless and that my late-night remote logins could never be traced by my tech-savvy father, I decided to run a live test of my new security algorithm on our own family's private home routers. I expected the scan to show a perfectly normal, quiet network. Instead, my monitors began flashing with urgent warning alerts. My diagnostic scanner had just flagged a massive, recurring hemorrhage of money leaking directly out of our household internet connection. The funds were being systematically drained through a highly complex, hidden offshore digital wallet registered to our home address. At first, a wave of panic washed over me because I assumed my father's commercial real estate empire was being targeted by a sophisticated team of international hackers. I immediately began tracing the encrypted IP signatures, peeling back layer after layer of proxy servers and security walls to expose the culprit. But as the final digital barrier fell, the trail did not lead to a cybercriminal network overseas. The tracking data terminated directly inside our own house, locking onto the unique media signature of my mother's personal tablet. Cordelia, the deeply religious, fragile woman who lectured me daily on holy living, was secretly running a massive, underground high-stakes digital gambling operation from her bedroom. She had developed a catastrophic addiction, quietly losing hundreds of thousands of dollars to illegal offshore casinos while hiding behind her saintly reputation. The true depth of my mother's secret was terrifying. As I dug deeper into her hidden digital accounts, I discovered that Cordelia had completely drained her own retirement funds. Worse, she had quietly taken out massive, fraudulent predatory loans by forging my father's corporate signatures. She was less than 30 days away from plunging our entire family into a public bankruptcy and facing severe criminal fraud charges. I sat in that dark basement office, staring at the screen, feeling the crushing weight of what this would do to our lives. If my father found out, his explosive, fragile pride would cause absolute devastation. He would launch a violent, messy divorce, and our family name would be completely destroyed in the community. Even though my parents were cold and oppressive, she was still my mother, and I could not just stand by and watch her life end in a prison cell. I made a silent, painful choice to carry this heavy secret alone. I did not say a word to anyone. Instead, I began using my high-paying night shift bonuses to quietly intercept her violent, back-alley digital creditors. Every time a loan shark threatened to expose her, I used my anonymous technical access to pay them off, one by one. The $42,000 under my mattress was not for myself, it was my liquid reserve, saved up to make the final, massive lump sum payment to clear the remaining debt before the month ended. Cordelia knew someone was magically paying off her debts from the shadows, but she had absolutely no idea it was the very son she was currently framing and throwing under the bus to save her own skin. The story snaps right back to the living room, where the heavy silence felt like the air before a lightning strike. My father, Vance, stepped forward and pressed the play button on the remote control. He leaned his body closer to the screen, an ugly, self-righteous smirk spreading across his face. He was fully expecting the video to show sketchy vehicles, drug couriers, or shady characters handing me heavy bags of contraband right in our immaculate driveway. Instead, the timestamp on the high-definition security footage clicked over to exactly 3:15 a.m., and a sleek, black luxury corporate town car smoothly pulled up to the curb. The vehicle was completely immaculate, bearing the official logo of the multi-billion-dollar international technology firm I secretly worked for. Dance's confident smirk instantly froze on his face. The rear passenger door of the town car swung open, and the security camera captured me stepping out onto the asphalt. I looked utterly exhausted, my shoulders slumped from fighting a 14-hour battle against cybercriminals while the rest of the neighborhood slept. Under the bright, motion-activated security spotlight of our front porch, there were no illegal substances, no weapons, and no criminal associates. I was carrying nothing but a heavy corporate laptop bag, and my official tech firm ID badge was clearly dangling from my belt loop, catching the light perfectly. My father's jaw dropped slightly as he watched the monitor. The video continued to play, showing my past self collapsing onto the top step of our porch out of sheer, physical fatigue. In my right hand, the camera clearly captured a physical, official corporate payroll envelope, stamped with the unmistakable metallic seal of the technology enterprise. Dance turned away from the television screen, his face draining of color as profound confusion took over his features. He looked at me, then back at the screen, completely unable to process why his supposed drug-dealing son was being chauffeured home by a Fortune 500 company. He opened his mouth to speak, his voice suddenly trembling, but before he could even form a question, I reached out and took the remote control directly from his hand. The initial trial they planned for me was over, and it was time for me to play the rest of the tape. My father turned to face me, his hands shaking as the reality set in. He realized he had just falsely accused his own son of being a drug dealer, and he looked like he wanted to apologize, but I did not give him the chance. I did not want his regrets. I stepped forward, gripped the remote control, and looked directly at my mother. Cordelia's face had turned completely white. She knew exactly what else was recorded on that hard drive. Without saying a word, I pressed the fast-forward button, skipping past my arrival, and stopped the video at exactly 4 a.m. on that very same night. The screen flickered as the video played at normal speed. The footage showed the front door of our house slowly opening in the pitch black. A figure wrapped in a heavy winter coat quietly sneaked out onto the porch, looking frantically left and right. It was my mother. Dance gasped, leaning closer to the glass screen as he watched his supposedly saintly wife hurry down the driveway in the middle of the night. At the edge of our property line, a dark sedan pulled up, and a heavily built, tattooed man stepped out to meet her. The camera's microphone was incredibly sharp, catching her voice perfectly as she started begging the man for more time. She explicitly told the loan shark that her son had over $40,000 in cash hidden under his mattress, promising him that she would make sure her husband found it, accuse her son of a crime, and hand the money over to clear her debts by morning. While the audio of her betrayal echoed through our quiet living room, I reached into my backpack and pulled out a thick folder of printed documents. I dropped the heavy stack of papers right onto the glass coffee table, directly in front of my father. It was the complete digital paper trail I had pulled from our router. The documents contained 3 years of my mother's secret gambling history, her massive offshore casino ledger, and the forged copies of my father's corporate signatures she had used to secure illegal loans. She had deliberately set me up, choosing to throw her own son to the wolves and let him face prison time just to cover up her own sickening addiction. The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. I was no longer the defense, I had just become the executioner of her secrets. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room as the video finished playing. The television screen cast a dull glow over my parents, who looked like statues frozen in time. My father slowly turned his head away from the screen and looked down at my mother. The expression on his face was a terrifying mix of pure horror, deep disgust, and completely shattered pride. In a matter of minutes, he had realized that his perfect, holy wife had completely ruined him financially, forged his business signatures, and permanently destroyed the pristine family name he had spent his entire life building. Cordelia suddenly snapped out of her shock. She lunged off the sofa toward me, her manicured hands grasping at my clothes as she fell to the floor. She wept hysterically, begging and pleading with me to tell my father that it was all a mistake, that the papers were fake, and that the video was a lie. I simply stepped backward, moving completely out of her reach with total, icy detachment. The son who had starved himself of sleep and sacrificed his youth to save her from the shadows was officially gone, killed the moment she chose to sacrifice him instead. I did not offer her a single word of comfort, nor did I demand an apology from my father. I knelt on the floor, picked up my worn leather tracking boots, and neatly packed the $42,000 in cash back inside them. I zipped up my heavy laptop bag, swung it over my shoulder, and stood tall, looking down at the two broken people who had tried to destroy me just a few hours earlier. I looked them both dead in the eye and told them that their toxic obsession with appearances, their complete lack of real love, and their pathetic hypocrisy had just cost them their only son. I told my father that the remaining balance on the house was officially cleared with the transfers I had already made, meaning he wouldn't lose the roof over his head, but everything else they cared about was gone. Without waiting for a response, I turned my back on them and walked out of the living room. I marched through the grand foyer and opened the massive front door, stepping out into the bright, warm morning sun. I did not bother to close it behind me. I left the front door wide open as I walked down the long cobblestone driveway toward the main road, never intending to look back. As I reached the edge of the property, the quiet suburban street was pierced by the sudden, explosive sound of my father's roaring fury and my mother's desperate screams as their marriage completely collapsed behind me. I took a deep breath of the fresh morning air, feeling the crushing weight of their expectations finally slip off my shoulders. They were trapped in the ashes of their own lies, and for the first time in my life, I was completely free.